So today we are very fortunate, very honored to have two members of the Clyde B. Govan Tri-State chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen, Inc. With us today, we have Mr. Paul Berger, is the torchbearer of the Clyde B. Govan Tri-State chapter Tuskegee Airmen, Inc. He's been one of the chapter's prominent speakers and advocates, and his knowledge and expertise are unsurpassed. Mr. Reynard Burns is the Public Relations Officer of the Clyde B. Govan Tri-State Chapter. He's presented the history of the Tuskegee Airmen for multiple events and has helped coordinate dedications and ceremonies honoring surviving airmen as well as those who have joined the Lonely Eagles. Just to give you, I'm not going to go through the whole mission of the organization. I'll let Mr. Burns and Mr. Berger tell us a little bit more about that. But again, we are honored because this is an opportunity that I think we have not really explored, and it's a topic that I think should be much more prevalent in our country's history, our country's heritage, about the accomplishment of the Tuskegee Airmen and what an accomplishment and of their valor and an honor to have had them in our midst. Mr. Burns?
Yes.
Or Mr. Berger?
Yes, my name is Reynard Burns. Thank you, ladies, for having us. It's our pleasure to give you a little history on the Tuskegee Airmen. This is going to be an overview because the history of the Airmen is so rich and so full, there's no way we could cover it all in a short amount of time. First of all, the Tuskegee Airmen, Inc., or Incorporated, has 50 chapters. The 50 chapters do not coincide with a number of states. There are some states that have more than one chapter. For instance, New York has 2 chapters. So there are 50 chapters for Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated. This organization got started in the early 70s, and that from then on, that's something that we'll try and work in later. What's very important is that the Tuskegee Airmen did an awful lot to integrate the military. Thanks to their efforts and their challenges and trials and tribulations, they were able to change the mindset of the American military. A principal problem they had was the 1925 War College statement that came out that said basically and directly that blacks were incapable of carrying any command, fighting anywhere else. They're not intelligent enough. They lack the coordination. They lack the skills. They lack the determination and the mindset to command or have any great benefit to a combat unit. And within that statement, they also said that they were incapable of flying a plane, maintaining a plane, or having anything to do with that aviation. And that was the principal roadblock to getting airmen started. This was in 1925, and virtually all the officers in the military accepted this as true fact. The challenge came, was really very hard to swallow. Many of the blacks in that time period were very interested in flying. They knew that that's what they wanted to do. They were led by or inspired by such people as Bessie Coleman and Eugene Jacques Villard, who flew for the French during World War I. But when he tried to join the American Air Force, when World War I broke out, he was denied access because he was black. Things began to change in 1938 when there was a program started that allowed 6 black colleges to start training in aviation. One of those was Tuskegee. Another major change came in 1939 when the civilian pilot training program started. This program was sponsored by the government. It was passed by Congress, And the intent was to train pilots for what they felt would be needed in possibly an upcoming war, because they were looking at Europe and other countries were doing the same, preparing for wartime by training more pilots. This program allowed for 66 colleges and approximately 20 other colleges to start training aviators. In 1940, President Roosevelt signed into law the first Draft Act, which was a peacetime draft, which gave a statement that anyone was allowed to join the service regardless of race or gender. This led an open door to the creation of a program at Tuskegee for pilot training, and Eleanor Roosevelt, the president's wife, went to Tuskegee in January of 1941, and with the intent to try and raise funds to complete another airfield. At this time, they were only working out of one airfield, Kennedy Airfield, and Moulton Field was still under construction. She went there with the intent, one, to raise funds for the completion of Moulton Field, and also to prove that blacks could fly planes. There was a trainer, his name was Anderson, and she insisted that she get a ride in one of the training planes, and she insisted that Mr. Anderson be the pilot, much against the advice of her security team. She came out of that plane and her statement was, "You can fly." She made it a point to have his picture taken with her in the plane so that she could take it back to Washington and say, "Look, you're wrong. They can fly." Shortly thereafter, Tuskegee became the pilot training program for future aviators, black aviators. The Tuskegee Institute was chosen, one, because it had better weather for most of the year, and because of their dedication to aviation. In 1943, the Tuskegee pilots experienced their first combat situation in Tunisia. They flew to Tunisia and became that first experience there. The first graduating class had 5 members. There were 13 who started, 5 graduated. These graduates were college graduates. They were well educated, and they made sure that they picked only the best because they wanted a high success rate. In spite of all this attention and determination to pick the best, to make the programs to succeed, the Army Air Corps and the military were continually trying to get the program to fail. There was a committee called the Committee for, I'm trying to remember the name, the Committee for Negro, too much information and not enough time, for Negro participation in battle. And that's not exactly what it is, but basically they were still being watched through most of the war. After their involvement in Tunisia, where they flew support for the beach at Anzio and had an outstanding record of taking down enemy aircraft, they later went to Sicily and excelled there as well. As time moved on, Benjamin O. Davis, who was currently commanding them, had to go back to the United States to plead the case for the Tuskegee Airmen. Benjamin O. Davis was a West Point graduate. He, during his time at West Point, he basically was alone. He was not allowed to speak. No one spoke to him other than through class time or anything connected with his education. He ate alone, slept alone, and basically spent 4 years in solitary because no one spoke to him. Despite that, he came out still at the top of his class. He went on to become the commander of the Tuskegee Airmen and made great strides in that area. In 1943, he came back to the United States and met with this committee to plead the case to keep the Tuskegee Airmen unit involved in combat. Shortly thereafter, they were attached to a different unit, and the perception of how they performed began to change. They were assigned escort duty to the 15th Air Force. These were heavy bombers, the B-17s. These B-17s had 10 crewmen each. Prior to the protection of the Tuskegee Airmen, who became known as the Red Tails, they were losing a multitude of aircraft on every mission. For example, if 10 aircraft were shot down, you're talking 100 lives were lost. This was way too high and almost terminated this mass bombing program. The Tuskegee Airmen were given the assignment of protecting the bombers. Prior to this, other fighter units would leave their protection duties to go after enemy fighters in order to gain ace standing to how many they could shoot down. When the Tuskegee Airmen took over, their orders were distinct from Colonel Davis was, you are not to leave the bombers under any circumstances. Shortly thereafter, the German fighters understood that these fighters are not going to leave. We had to find another way to take out the bombers. They were not so successful. The Tuskegee Airmen record excels anywhere else, and according to Roscoe Brown, who has a picture behind me right here, they never lost a bomber in combat. Roscoe Brown, who became Dr. Roscoe Brown after the war, was one of the flight commanders on a mission that was in 1945, if I'm not correct. 1945, March of 1945, which is probably the longest mission into Germany that was ever flown by the Allies and the bombers. They flew in to do a bombing mission, and they had at this time the P-51 Mustang, which was an incredible flying machine. It had speeds that exceeded 400 miles an hour. It was the cream of the crop. They had finally gotten a plane that flies well and maneuvered well. However, it was a long run, and the Army Air Corps decided that the Tuskegee Airmen, or colored flyers, did not need the fuel tanks necessary for a long flight. However, the support crew for the Tuskegee Airmen managed to find the needed fuel tanks. And this is a story about the Great Train Robbery. There are a variety of stories of how they obtained the tanks, and they pulled a midnight raid on a train that was stopped and had these tanks that they needed. So miraculously, these tanks appeared and were installed on the Mustangs so that they could complete this flight. This flight went, and they were supposed to be relieved by another fighter unit. For some reason, the other fighter unit did not appear, they got lost, or the timing wasn't correct. So the airmen made a decision to continue to escort the bombers. And they did, with these extra fuel tanks that allowed them to fly for a much longer period. During this time, Dr. Brown, who was one of the squadron commanders at the time, encountered a German jet, which is the first time that they had encountered one, and it was this one. It's a Messerschmitt. All right, Mr. Berger is going to talk to you about this plane later, but he was one of 3 airmen who shot down these jets. They had speeds that exceeded the Mustang speed by 120 miles an hour, roughly.
That's correct.
They could fly that much faster. However, on the spot, on the fly, excuse the pun, the airman, Dr. Brown, was able to decide, well, they're going to fly across in front of me at some point, so if I drop down and come up underneath, I'll just get in the path they're going to fly through and open fire as they came through. He was successful. I'm going to roll back a little bit on something I missed. There was a picture that came up for, if you could display that picture, thank you. That is, I spoke about Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady, and the Chief of Pilot Training at Tuskegee, who was Mr. Anderson. This picture here, you can see in the lower part of your screen, is the picture that was taken when they landed. And that's the one that Eleanor Roosevelt used when she went back to Washington to promote the support of Tuskegee Airfield. Thank you very much. The next thing that we need to know, and I'm giving you, again, a brief overview, in the Tuskegee Airmen experience, which is what it was called after 1945, there were roughly 16,000 members who had contact with graduating or at Tuskegee. That included pilots, support crew, clerical staff, nurses, and so on. Prior to 1945, from 1941 to 1945, it was called the Tuskegee Experiment. The name was changed in 1945 so it wouldn't be confused with the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment, which was also done in Tuskegee but in a different area. But the Tuskegee Experience went all the way up to 1949 when the 332nd, unit was dissolved because the Air Force at this point was now desegregated. So they no longer needed that unit to exist as a separate unit. All the units in World War II and previous years were segregated. They were not allowed to fly together, dine together, or do anything else. The base at Ramitelli, where the pilots took off from in their campaign to Germany and other campaigns, was solely run by the blacks. The commanders were black, their support crew were black, the pilots were, and so on. The B-17s did not know who was in those planes that had red tails. They were known as red tails right up until 1955, when they took on the name Tuskegee Airmen. But there was one incident where a B-17 was disabled and they had to do an emergency landing at Ramitelli. When the B-17 pilots disembarked from their plane, they found out that these red tails, who they had looked forward to seeing when they were on a mission, were actually black. And they were amazed that these were the people who were protecting them with such skill and determination. In 1945, the 477th Bombardment Group. The 477th Bombardment Group was also Tuskegee Airmen. They were trained at Tuskegee, and of the 996 pilots who graduated from Tuskegee, 220 of them were twin-engine pilots. They were later the pilots of the 477th. Their first graduating class of twin-engine was 1943. 1945 rolls around, and they are still in training. They have not been used yet, they have not been deployed yet, and they're still being challenged and held under the thumb of segregation of the Army Air Corps. Colonel Salway, who was in charge of, who commanded this particular post, decided that he was going to maintain the segregationist attitude and create two different officer clubs, one for trainees, one for instructors. Of course, all the trainees were black. The Tuskegee Airmen officers decided that they were going to create a plan to bring this to the attention of the Army Air Corps, because this particular practice violated a law that they had come out with, that they could not segregate their officers. Officers and enlisted men who were white did not have to salute the black officers, even though it must be done by Army standards. But they were forgiven from having to salute. In any case, these officers of the 477th decided that they were going to go into the officers' club, the training club, a few at a time. And they started with 10, and those 10 were arrested. They started, and the next day they sent 25. They were arrested. The next day they sent 30, and they were arrested. And finally, there were roughly 101 officers under arrest. The Tuskegee officers sent a letter to the Army Air Corps Command and informed them of what was happening, and they insisted they be released. The Colonel Selway, who was the commander of the base, decided he was going to pursue it another way. We were going to have these two clubs, and everyone on the base was going to sign that they understood that that was how it was supposed to be done, and they accepted it. 100 members of the 477th refused to sign. They were informed that they were in violation of an order and they could be put to death. They still refused to sign. They were put under arrest, and this is exactly what they wanted. They sent letters again to the Army Air Corps. The NAACP found about it. Other newspapers found out about it. And on their behalf, they brought this attention to the public, and they were so outraged that most of them were released, but the Army Air Corps conceded and had 3 of them discharged and given charges of insubordination and expelled. 2 were eventually vindicated, but 1 was charged with pushing an officer, which they claimed he had shoved aside on the way in. It took until 1995 for his records to be cleared. So it took that long for things to be corrected at what happened. But the significance of this Freeman Field mutiny, as it was called, was that this was the first record of a peaceful demonstration that used the system to correct the system. So this was the predecessor of the civil rights movement. And that is why the 477th move for the Freeman Field mutiny is of such importance, because they made a stand and collectively did not do anything violent. They had a peaceful protest and planned well ahead what to do and how to rectify a situation. It did not change some of the mindset, but as a result of this particular incident, Colonel Davis became the commander of the 477th, and changes began to happen as far as how the base was run and their participation. They still never made it into combat, despite that they were ready to go, and the requests by MacArthur to have them participate, but they were able to finagle things and make it so that they were held back until the war was over. So there's a complete bomber unit who flew B-25s that were not allowed to participate in World War II and bring their expertise into use. Mr. Berger.
Thank you, Ray. And ladies, please, thank you so much for bringing us into your homes, rooms, wherever we are broadcasting to. I'm dressed in the attire of a flyer of that era. The flight suit is pretty much standard. The flying glasses, the hat that I'm wearing has the insignia of the Army Air Corps. They were not the U.S. Air Corps, the United States Air Force at that time. They were known simply as the U.S. Army Air Corps. The jacket that you see here was also standard wear. It's a A2 jacket. This particular one was actually redesigned by a very, very famous Tuskegee Airman, Wild Bill Wheeler, the gentleman that actually brought me into the organization. And I get very emotional when I think about Wild Bill. He's not with us any longer, but a very, very special gentleman. So Ray was kind enough to give you a pretty terrific overview. I'm going to roll back history for you in a little bit, and at the end of the program, please feel free to throw your questions to either Ray or myself. 1940, the Roosevelt administration knew that war was not far away. Yet the United States was filled with, we can't go to war, we won't go to war, we want to be isolationists. We lost too many people in World War I. We're not going to get into a war in Europe. And besides, there's an entire ocean that spans a continent from that creates separation between continents. They couldn't possibly get to us. It's going to be all right. Well, Roosevelt knew better, and he created an opportunity, saw an opportunity with England, and it was called Lend-Lease. England gave us room to put airports and flight facilities for our bombers for a future conflict, and we gave England some World War I destroyers so that they could maintain their shipping routes across the Atlantic, because unfortunately by this time Germany had already declared war on England. And then in 1941, the flames of war erupted. Not only were we attacked by Japan and declared war on Japan much a couple of days later after the famous Day of Infamy. But right after that, Germany declared war on the United States. Italy declared war on the United States. Russia declared war on the United States. And the United States was ill-prepared for war. Our boys were training, the Army was training with broomsticks. They simply didn't have enough rifles. Broomsticks. And the Joint Chiefs of Staff knew from the very, very outset that we could not defeat the German war machine on land. We simply didn't have enough troops. We didn't have enough tanks. We couldn't defeat them on the sea because our entire Pacific fleet was immobilized, for lack of a better word, at Pearl Harbor. And of course, we had to fight a war in the Pacific and fight a war in Europe. So they determined that the only way to defeat the Nazi war machine was to conquer quickly their manufacturing, their oil supply, cripple the German war machine. If you cripple the German war machine, you cripple the Germans' army ability to wage war. Sounded like a great idea. So they rushed to the only aircraft that was capable of carrying tons and tons of bombs from England into the hostile areas of France, Germany, and Italy. It was the B-17. Now, it looks like a formidable piece of equipment. It was actually called the Flying Fortress. If you look closely, you'll see that it bristled with machine guns. Every area of the aircraft had a machine gun. The idea was that if the German fighter interceptor aircraft got in, they would be destroyed. The B-17 would fly in box formations, and the areas between the planes were called kill zones. It was a wonderful, wonderful idea, but it was doomed to failure. And something that needs to be brought out immediately is that there were no, as Mr. Burns told you, there were no black flyers in the Army Air Corps at the time. These aircraft were manned by white folks. And there, a little bit later on, we have a little bit of time, right? A little bit later on, I want to talk to you about this incredible brotherhood between the Tuskegee Airmen and the guys that they protected. And we'll come back to that very quickly. The Germans figured this thing out very fast. They simply said, well, this thing is equipped with machine guns. We'll simply fire cannon at them from a greater distance, and their machine guns will be ineffective. How ineffective were they? On any given day, the 8th Air Force that was flying out of England lost between 60 and 80 aircraft. Every aircraft had a group of 10 men in it, white men. It got so bad that the Joint Chiefs of Staff were considering doing away with daylight bombing. And you might say, oh my God, how is this possible? How could we have missed this incredible concept? Well, we missed it quickly because the only frontline aircraft we had at the time was the P-40 Warhawk. Great little aircraft, but little is the word. It had reduced range. It was a piston engine system, no turbocharger, could not match the speed of German aircraft, but more than anything else, it did not have the range to escort the bombers to the target and back. And let me tell you this. Had this situation continued unabated, I wouldn't be here today as a Jew. You folks wouldn't be here as white folks. It would be a completely different world because we now know that Hitler was this close to developing the atom bomb. And he already had a missile in the V-2 that could deliver it intermediate range, and it was just a matter of time before he had a more specific, involved delivery system. So you're saying, so what happened? How did we come out? Well, we came out because the guts of the Tuskegee Airmen began to show. They showed, as my co-host indicated, they showed at their first opportunity in North Africa. They flew this aircraft against the German Me-109. This aircraft carrying machine guns, this aircraft carrying cannon. And they prevailed. And they prevailed. Now, I don't want to take anything away from the white folks because, not because I'm white necessarily, but because these guys knew before close air support came into the picture that had they not carried out their mission, there would be no chance of victory. So every night they came home, said their prayers, wrote a letter to their sweeties, their wife, their children, and then that morning got back into their aircraft. The Tuskegee Airmen were finally given an opportunity to fly close air support to the bombers. And they were also given, as Mr. Burns told you, an opportunity to fly an aircraft with superior aeronautical capability, the P-51D Mustang, equipped with the very long-range tanks that Mr. Burns talked about, could actually fly wing to wing, a different concept. Now, we had CAP, white flyers above these guys too, in Mustangs. They were called combat air patrols, but their job, their set of orders were different. When they spotted a German aircraft group, they rushed to attack them. In the case of the Tuskegee Airmen, their orders were very specific. You are not pursuit pilots. You are fighter pilots. And you will stay with the aircraft until your mission and the mission of the bomber is complete, has been completed. Now let me tell you something about why people fight. I was a soldier. I was never in combat. But this much I can tell you. A soldier doesn't fight for his country. He doesn't fight for his flag. He doesn't even fight for his God. He fights for his buddy. So all of a sudden, an incredible buddy system developed between the black flyers in the Mustang and the white flyers in the B-17s. Probably the first time in history that came about. And just backing up a little bit more, ladies, this was the aircraft that the folks started flying in. It's called a Stearman biplane. You've probably seen them in World War I movies. While our people were training with this type of aircraft, the German pilots were training with lower profile versions of this. So it was an incredible, incredible situation. And the particular mission that Mr. Burns is talking about in 1945, when Roscoe Brown actually brought down that ME-262, I was fortunate enough to know Roscoe. And I used to say to him, Roscoe, how did you do it? And he said, well, it was pretty simple. He said, I saw them, I turned my plane, I went bum, 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 and they bad guys came down. I said, Roscoe. And I used to think the man was pompous, but that wasn't the case at all. Roscoe felt that he could not have done anything without the folks on the ground. Here's one of those folks right now, okay? At Tuskegee, ladies were trained to be not pilots, but mechanics, first aid folks, and so on. On the home front, the very, very famous Rosie the Riveter was there. And without Rosie and her counterparts, white or black, the war could not have been won, because it was their job to work the factories during the day, take care of their families at night, and then back at the factories in the morning. So when we talk about a global effort and in a completely united effort, that's so. There's absolutely no question about it. And the upshot of that today is it's not unusual to have a black pilot, male or female, in a commercial airliner. These are opportunities that the Tuskegee Airmen and their wonderful sacrifices were responsible for. My job is to keep the flame burning, to let folks know what they did, how they did it, and why they did it. And I was privileged in years, knowing these folks, and I would go to schools with them. And they never talked about the blood of combat or the blood that they saw in terms of their segregationist situations. They always talked about the following: love your God, love your country, stay in school, and you can be anything that you want to be. So ladies and gentlemen, ladies, I won't say gentlemen, ladies, thank you. And any questions that you may have, Mr. Burns and I are here for you.
Thank you,
First of all, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Burns and Mr. Berger, for a wonderful presentation. The platform, I guess, that Mr. Moses put together, which enabled us to see you and the pictures and your illustrations, is a wonderful job, and thank you for orchestrating that. That is an amazing thing. I think you brought to the table information that we have not previously had, and your dedication to carrying this information not only today but into the future is astounding, and please stay with it. I know personally I have a number of questions, but I would like to open it up to the ladies of the chapter to please reach out to Mr. Burns and Mr. Berger with anything that you would like to ask. And I can't see any hands raised right now. Alyssa, you'll have to do it. Evelyn Carmichael, you're on your speaker.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was really lovely.
Very welcome.
Thank you.
And very full. I remember going to the movie theater on 33rd Street and watching Red Tail, the movie.
Yes, ma'am.
I wonder, with my two sons who were both in JROTC, I wonder if you can talk about whether that was accurate, well depicted, what your feelings are about the film, if you have any.
I did speak to one of the airmen about that movie, and quite a few of the airmen were used to provide information, so it was as close to factual as possible. Of course, it was put in the Hollywood sense. So the stories of the individual pilots were not really that individual pilot, but it was a conglomeration of several different figures into one personality. For the most part, the information there is correct, although it was somewhat altered to make it more presentable in a Hollywood configuration. The incident with the train is correct. It wasn't one pilot, though it was several pilots. The incident with the destroyer is correct, but it was a question whether it was a destroyer or something else, but they did do serious damage to it and took it out of action. One of the airmen, in a speech he made in regard to the movie, he decided that the personality of the airman who had a drinking problem was not something he would like to see. So there were some things that were questionable by particular airmen, but for the most part, Red Tails is very close to incidents and feelings incidents that happened and events. So it is a good source to start. There are other movies, predecessors of Red Tails, that are also about the Tuskegee Airmen. One is 1995, Tuskegee Airmen, I think it's Lawrence Fishburne is one, which is an exceptional movie. But the Red Tails is one that fits into today's viewing preferences. I'll put it that way, because it has the pop, I guess, that people want to see. It's exciting. It does present things in a very positive note for the accomplishment they did and not necessarily what they had to go through. They did say in multiple instances that they were more accepted by the people in Europe than they were by their own. So that is something. I hope that answers your question.
I would just like, if I could, Ray, to expand on that slightly. I was very, very honored to, believe it or not, to introduce Red Tails to a quadruplex in Harlem, along with a Tuskegee Airman at my side. So you had to see this to believe it. The lights come up, and here is a white guy, exactly dressed the way I am, standing next to a black flyer. So the audience immediately starts to rumble a little bit. And I said, I know, ladies and gentlemen, I know. You're asking what's a white dude doing in a black neighborhood to show a movie about black flyers. And I'll give you another one. Not only am I a white dude, but I'm a white Jewish dude. Oh! And I said, so let me give you another drop of history. In 1939, it was a white Jewish dude who helped to begin the NAACP. So I guess you'll let me stay. Oh yeah, sure. Oh sure. we had a marvelous evening that evening, and the movie was, as Ray told you, very, very well received. It took certain liberties, but for the most part, the valor and the sacrifices that the airmen displayed during the war was clearly carried on within the movie. Thank you for that question.
And I see Eugenia was next in line, and then Kate will come to you. Eugenia?
I just wanted to thank you for the presentation, which I found very touching on a multitude of levels. The idea of those airmen and their Mustangs flying protection and security around the B-17s, particularly because my mother was a farrier with a multi-engine pilot license, and she used to fly those B-17s.
Yes, ma'am. From
the production site to the air bases. So I feel a connection.
Well, and well, it should be a wonderful, wonderful, and so many thanks there too, because the Army Air Corps could simply not afford to bring pilots back from the front to do that, and these women took terrible, terrible chances with the weather. Everything else under the sun. It was, and I might mention one other thing. I also do volunteer work at the American Air Power Museum in Farmingdale. We're going to have a very, very special day on Memorial Day there. And there is to speak to that, your mom's dedication, there is actually a very, very wonderful display dedicated to the ladies who flew those aircraft, and anybody who would like to come, you can come on my VIP pass over the Memorial Day weekend. The password is Red Tail, okay? And that'll get you guys in free, all right?
Thank you.
Thank you, Eugenia, and thanks for that reminder of your mother. That's really incredible. Thank you. And then Kate, you had a question, Kate Ludlam?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to thank both of you gentlemen for an amazing presentation. My dad had told me about the Red Tails. He was in World War II, 1944 to 1945, stationed in Northampton, England. And at base 131 there, I noticed the plane that you have, the B-17 model.
Yes, ma'am.
Has markings for the 398th Bomb Group. They were heavy.
You know, I never noticed that myself, but
W on the tail plane. So.
Okay, I'm with you 100%. that's something I never looked into. But certainly, once again, I take my hat off to your dad and his sacrifice.
The bomb group, I think almost everybody is gone now, but I was privileged to attend the anniversary, the 60th anniversary of D-Day with them. And all of the pilots very much appreciated the Red Tails.
I have a quick, how much time have we got? I don't want to.
We have a little bit of time,
Okay,
and I would like to.
There is a D-Day story that follows up Mr. Burns' discussion of the 477th Bomb Group. And this is a harrowing story, but it's absolutely true. Everybody, I'm sure you saw Saving Private Ryan, okay? The D-Day invasion at Omaha Beach in Normandy. I actually visited Normandy, and the sacrifice of these men was incredible. And that beach was littered with white folks, obviously. Some black infantrymen as well, but that's not the story. The story is that the Air Force, we were already the U.S. Air Force at that time, missed their target. The Navy missed their target. So the Germans literally came out of their fortifications and blasted away. Now you want to know what the connection is here? The 477th Bomb Group, flying the Mitchell bomber, was actually trained for low-level bombing. And I get goosebumps whenever I tell this story. That aircraft additionally could have been furnished with a 75 millimeter recoilless rifle, a very, very powerful piece of equipment that literally could take apart any emplacement. Our government said it's okay for a black man to fight a white man one-on-one, thus aerial, plane-to-plane aerial combat. It is not okay for a black man to bomb a white population. Do you believe that? But it's true. It's absolutely true. It's okay for the black man to bomb a yellow population. So our boys in the 477th were packing up for the invasion of Japan when the atom bomb was dropped. You can only imagine how many lives would have been saved had the 477th Bomb Group been allowed to go into action. They would have flown in at low level. They would have used that recoilless rifle. They would have discharged their bombs right over the Germans. And the rest would have been history, instead of the carnage that we saw. So once again, I stand before you, Mr. Burns stands before you as living examples of what can't possibly happen again. That people, and the other thing I want to bring out is our people, and I've been privileged to be with them since 2006, they never talked about white lives matter or black lives matter. They always talked about all lives matter. And the gentleman, my mentor, Wild Bill Wheeler, used to say to me, Paul, there's only one race, the human race. So I want to leave you folks with that as well. That's what these guys stood for. That's what we stand for. And that's, as long as we have air in our and strength in our bodies, that's what we will always stand for. Thank you.
God bless you. We have a few more questions.
Sure.
Linda Jones, and then Donna Horak.
Okay. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ma'am.
Well, I am the daughter of a Tuskegee Airman and hero pilot. And I just want to thank you for sharing this information, because as great a person as my father was, and his contribution to the war was written up, and we might show his picture if we can pull that up quickly while I'm talking. He never spoke about his war activities. Very humble. So I don't know if this is typical of other airmen to keep that side so private. I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Roscoe, and he did know my dad, but my father, unfortunately, he passed rather early, and I never knew. So I so appreciate what you're sharing with us, and I just encourage you to keep on sharing and contributing. My dad, if we could put that picture up, Lisa, if you can, he was with the 100th Fighter Squadron.
Oh.
There he is. George M. Rhodes Jr. He joined in 10th of October, 1943. He served till the 10th of December, 1946. He was with the 100th Fighter Squadron in the European theater, and he led a flight of 4 B-51s in strafing and bomber protection combat operation. Flew 55 missions of that type and accumulated 1,350 flying hours.
Incredible.
And after he served overseas, he became a flight instructor on AT-6 type aircraft for 18 months. I so appreciate your getting the word out and for informing me. So thank you so much, gentlemen. It was a wonderful presentation.
May I just answer your question in terms of why he didn't talk about it, ma'am?
Yes.
That is not at all uncommon with men and women who were really in it. They can't talk about it because some of the things they saw was simply that terrible. They just couldn't get it out. You almost have to pull it out of them. The fellas that will tell you about their exploits probably weren't there. And that's germane. Again, I was never in combat myself, but I've known a lot of men who were. And I work with veterans all the time, and they will never talk about the horrors. In fact, they make jokes about it. At one particular air show, a gentleman who was a gunner on a B-17 came over to the aircraft, and he put his hand on it, and he closed his eyes, and suddenly he was in the skies over Europe. And then a very lovely lady came over to him, and she said, look, she said, I appreciate all of the things you've done, but you were fighting behind bulletproof glass. So he smiled at her and he said, yes, you're right, ma'am. It was bulletproof, as long as the Germans weren't firing at us. Okay. That's how they got through it, with a sense of humor, a sense of duty, and knowing that unless they did their job, there could be no victory. None. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Donna Horak had a question, and I said that she could go next.
Can I just add something for Linda's part?
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Linda Rhodes Jones neglected to mention to you gentlemen that her father won the Distinguished Flying Cross.
Wow, that's an incredible, well, wonderful. I'm sure you're aware what the DFC meant, okay? Besides, he put him in, besides everyone else that put themselves in harm's way, he did it over and over and over again. Okay, that's what a DFC is all about. Wonderful.
Donna Horak, you had a question?
Yes, I just wanted to say, my dad was a tank commander, Lieutenant Frank Horak. He was trapped in the city of Bastogne, and he was rescued by the Tuskegee Airmen and the other pilots that came and got them out of there. And if it hadn't been for them, I personally would not be alive, because you saved him. And I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you
On
for
their behalf.
his service. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Donna. Thank you. I'm touched by how many people are touched by the Tuskegee Airmen just right here. It's an incredible story. I had a question. Who else has questions out there that I don't want to cut anybody off? Linda, you had a question?
Just another question. I wanted to find out how Mr. Berger got involved within the Tuskegee Airmen program, as well as Mr. Burns, who I understand is also a son of a Tuskegee Airman. I don't believe he mentioned that. So how did you become involved?
Well,
That was my
I'll
question.
defer first to Mr. Burns.
Actually, I am not the son of a Tuskegee Airman. So that, I don't know where that information came from, but I do need to correct that. I am not the son or any other relative or connection to the Tuskegee Airmen, other than my increasing interest in what they accomplished and what they continue to accomplish. My involvement started with being invited to a meeting and sitting down in a meeting and seeing, at that time, 5 or 6 actual airmen. And what caught me by surprise was how quick they were to focus on getting the business done at hand. They had a tremendous sense of humor. They were very quiet, but when a project presented itself, they shifted gears in a matter of seconds to get the job done. And they got it done in a timely fashion. One of the things that was really impressed me was that they would sit there and watch. The meeting was, for instance, would start at 1, and when 2:30 came, all of these watchers went off and they would say, "Madam President, our time is almost up. Let's wrap it up." So they were still on a timeline, in spite of being in their 80s and 90s plus. And they may have moved physically slower, but their minds were razor sharp. And that's one of the things that kept me involved and continues to keep me involved, even though many of them have passed on.
My participation began in a completely different way. I was, as I mentioned previously, I did volunteer work at the American Air Power Museum. And in 2006, the Tuskegee Airmen had just received the Congressional Gold Medal from the then President George Bush. And they came into the museum, and I'm looking at this line of men who were, even at that time, in their 80s, and I'm saying, holy smokes, this is history jumping out at me. These are the Tuskegee Airmen, the fellows that I've read about my entire life. So I rushed over to one of the more charismatic guys, put out my hand, and he said, "What are you, a groupie?" So I turned around and I said, "You know, I don't even know what a groupie is." Of course I did. Well, we became fast friends. That was then Wild Bill Wheeler, and he brought me into the organization, and years later he said, "Paul, you're one of us now, and you will always be one of us." And there were 2 recreations of the gold medal. One went to his son, and he gave me the other one. That's how close we were. Very, very wonderful, wonderful man. And the other thing he always left me with was, "Paul, in spite of all you do with the organization, I want you to remember family first. Family first." Wonderful, wonderful. So that's how I began, ma'am.
I would like to say, in deference to Mr. Burns, yes, we are on a timeline.
Yes.
I would like to ask you if you don't mind hanging out maybe a few minutes longer. I personally had some questions. I kind of wish we had started earlier because I think you have so much information. But I did want to ask you if you don't mind hanging out for a few more minutes. Is that
No, I don't mind at all.
Okay, thank you. And I also have to ask the chapter, because I know the chapter's on a timeline. I'm hoping that those that can hang with us will hang with us, and then we'll adjourn the meeting at that time. I myself have a number of questions, but again, I still want to open to the chapter any questions because they're all great questions and giving us an opportunity to learn more information. So is anybody else open forum? Okay, well, you'll still have an opportunity.
Before you go, in case some of your chapter members decide to leave the meeting, if Chuck, you can put up that slide with the young gentleman there. Yes? This picture depicts what our mission continues to be as well, and the mission of the Tuskegee Airmen today, which is to go out and encourage today's youth to say the job has been started. The job you have now is to finish or continue. And this little poster, I think, says it all, because of we can. And the door opened with the Tuskegee Airmen and their offspring and their supporters, and it continues to be that way. And as we do presentations, the big mission of ours is to inform the public and anyone else about the Tuskegee Airmen, but also to send the message that it is so important to continue your education, to not let anything stand in your way, make up your mind, things can be done. The only thing lacking, possible lacking, is that your determination is not strong enough. Determination is what sets it forward, and for these Tuskegee Airmen, they were determined to prove that they could fly and not only maintain but excel in that job of fighting for a country that did not fight for them, but they felt a part of, and continue to feel a part of, and will not stop trying to make it an America for all.
Amen.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Amen. Tagging on, Linda. You kind of brought to light some of my questions, which, but I am going to start, having read a little bit of your information. What is a lonely eagle?
A lonely eagle is a chapter that is designated for those who have passed on. They have left their earthly chapter and joined the lonely eagle in the sky. So they have moved on and they become members of the Lonely Eagle chapter. They have an application that fills out, and we send it in to the national office, and they become members of the Lonely Eagle chapter. And that's what that is.
Thank you. And then I think you just kind of hinted at the Junior Eagle.
The Junior Eagle would be youth and younger members that are in essence, training or learning what they can about the Tuskegee Airmen. Is that?
I quite frankly,
that is what it is.
I'm not familiar with that term at all,
Junior Eagle. To the best of my knowledge.
I defer to your knowledge.
You also kind of just gave a hint of your mission. One of my questions was, how would you like to see it land? You're really bringing something to the table, and I think I mentioned before, it's not out there enough, but your organization, in a perfect world, and I'm sure in the back of your mind when you're visioning, where would you like to see your efforts land worldwide?
Worldwide, in curriculum and education programs, in big recognition in not only in museums, but in places that everybody goes to, because everybody doesn't go to a museum.
And the history books.
And history books as well. How many things do you recall seeing about the Tuskegee Airmen in a history book? How many times was it presented in a social studies class? And we have made efforts in the past to have it included in curriculum, and at best, it's been part of someone's curriculum already, primarily because the person running that is also associated with the Air Force ROTC, but also because that particular teacher has an interest in it. But for the most part, it's not part of the curriculum, and it's very hard to get it included in a curriculum. And perhaps if it were included in books, in online formats, that people could see it, and it was recognized in more than just a few locations in parades and so on, it would create an interest. And I think that's what we're primarily trying to do, is create an interest. And even in our presentations, when we provide links for people to read it, again, it is up to that particular person to actually pursue. And there are so many distractions. Mr. Berger has a friend who has contacted literally every school in New York City and is currently working on schools in Nassau and Suffolk County to make them aware of the Tuskegee Airmen. And a video we created.
Give these folks the link, right?
Yes, we can provide the link for you to a YouTube channel that we're beginning to put videos on. And we have a video we produced with Mr. Berger and myself, and we interviewed some of our heritage or children of Tuskegee Airmen. And Mr. Moses has very kindly been the coordinator and helped to produce that video. And it is available. We will send that link to you to our YouTube channel, And we will be continually adding more videos about Tuskegee history, about interviews with airmen, and conversations that we are going to have amongst ourselves. In much the same way we're talking now, where it's an exchange of information. It's not viewed as a class, but it's an exchange of information in a relaxed atmosphere that takes away that onus of teacher-student. It's all about what do we have to talk about, and that's what we're looking at trying to do.
That's brilliant, and I 100%. You know, when you were saying get it into our curriculum, that would be that would be an amazing accomplishment, and one that I think everybody here would like to see. And I really appreciate your saying that, and I really appreciate your attacking that goal, and we'd like to see that come to fruition. So I you know, kind of puts to mind anything that we can do. I bet a few people here would take it on, even if it's one step at a time, even if it's a dropperful that would push it forward, because sometimes that's what it takes. I think, as you've expressed, just about the Tuskegee Airmen and what they went through themselves. My next question for you, and I appreciate everybody staying with me because I do have a few questions, is how many Tuskegee Airmen are living today, actual Tuskegee Airmen?
That's very hard to say, because there are airmen who never registered with a particular chapter, and we're finding out more and more about some have passed away, and we didn't even know they were in existence, that they lived. And that pulls us back to that comment that many of them did not share their experience, even with their own families. So I know several years ago there was an airman who passed away out on Long Island, and only one of his sons knew that he was, and the other one had very spattered information about it. But it was still something that they wish they had learned more about. So it's very hard. I would say out of the 16,000, roughly 16,000, I would speculate maybe 500, and you're talking support personnel and actual pilots. You have to remember that they went into the service when they were in their late teens and early 20s. So they're in their late 90s now, or some have passed away. We lost a member who was 102 last year, and another one that was 100 that same year. So, you know, they're up there in age. So it's very hard to zero in on exactly how many are left, because, as I said, not all of them registered or have signed up with a particular chapter or notified anyone that they're still around. And that was, you know, 500 is purely speculative, so don't quote me on it.
Okay, we won't quote you on it, but thank you for coming up with a number that kind of gives us some sort of relativity. And I appreciate that what you do for recognizing them and probably trying to find out who's out there still. So thank you for that. Who is Claude B. Govan?
Claude B. Govan was a Tuskegee Airman. The chapter was named after him, and he was an airman. And I don't have all of that information in front of me. I should have it memorized, but storage space is somewhat limited now. So if you go on our website, which is nyctai.org, there will be a biography of Claude B. Govan, the namesake of our chapter.
Very good. Thank you. Does anybody else out there have any questions? Eugenia, you're on mute. You're on mute, Eugenia. Go ahead.
Hi. I just wondered, I don't know, somewhere in the back of my memory, is the Lonely Eagle a particular flight formation?
No.
No.
That is flown to honor the fallen?
You're thinking about the, there is a formation that, I know that what you're talking about, ma'am, but it's not called the Lonely Eagle.
Thank you.
It's a formation where one aircraft is purposely
Exactly.
left out of the
Exactly.
formation. I'm
Or
sorry,
it
I
feels
don't
off.
have the actual name, but it's not the Lonely Eagle.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
It's the missing
The
man.
missing man,
Thank you.
that's it. You got it, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you. Missing man is correct.
Linda, did you have a question? Somehow you're showing up here, so.
No, I don't have a question. I see Doris has a question.
Okay, Doris?
Hi. Yes, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your presentation. This has just been so heartwarming and revealing to me. And it really shows us how much we all really need one another.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
want to ask how, if we wanted to support any of the, as individuals, any of the initiatives of your organization, are you a 501c3 nonprofit? And if so, how would we go about supporting any of the initiatives that you have?
We are a 501c3 organization, and again, if we go to our website, you'll find there's a way to donate to the chapter in various forms. You can donate as a support of our tuition assistance program. We do provide scholarships to college-bound high school seniors after they complete and successfully complete the application process. So there is a way to funnel that money towards improving the education or continuing the education of students who are planning on attending college. So there is a way. Again, the website is, and we will send that to you as well as the link to our YouTube channel, nyctai.org. The current website is there. Eventually we will have an updated website that will provide additional information. But, you are still able to send donations through that website, nyctai.org. NYC is New York City, TAI is Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated.org.
Thank you.
Any other questions out there? Then I don't want to miss anybody. I did, Mr. Burns,
Yes.
and Mr. Bergen, I did see some, I just thought of it, in Penn Station, there happened to have been some posters a while back. We're going back a number of years. I'm just wondering if that was you guys.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Well, somebody got it out there, so I definitely distinctly remember seeing that. So somebody's also helping out. I don't know if that was maybe from the parent organization or not. I just, again, I just want to thank you. You both gave such wonderful presentations that educated us and opened our minds to what was happening and what transpired and how important the Tuskegee Airmen were. Members of our own chapter also intimated information that I was unaware of, and just an honor to have had you with us today, an honor for all of the information that you've provided. You're both incredibly knowledgeable. Your expertise and your detailing was just on the mark. And I just want to thank you both so much for your contributions, not only to us today, but your contribution to the world in extending this information and making sure that it's out there. So thank you.
Thank you.
ma'am.
Thank you very much
your
for having us.
organization.
We appreciate it. An anecdote, we mentioned about trying to get it into schools and curriculum. The challenge is that the chain of command very often gets intercepted. Sending information to the hierarchy doesn't necessarily trickle down to where the work actually gets done, which is in the classroom. So anyone who has a contact with a social studies department or anything to that effect, churches, we're not relegated to just educational institutions, but any particular organization or group is all part of this educational system. And as long as the information gets disseminated, it doesn't really matter what the source is. Again, it's up to the individual teacher. We found that if they have time or are willing to take time to include it in their presentation, even if it's for a day to whet the appetite. And again, the presentation has to be done such that it does whet the appetite and not just, well, we're here to talk about the Tuskegee Airmen, they flew this, they did that, and they did that. And again, delivery is so important. We are developing educational movies and slides and so on that should make it somewhat easier to present, which takes that, that challenge, helps the individual teacher address that challenge of gathering information, because it does take time to gather information, and we all know that education is very challenging already. We're not trying to add more stress to an already overstressed profession, but to help get the information out there in the most expedient fashion as possible.
Yeah, Chris Abutis, that's a shout out to you. I hope you're taking notes, working for Columbia EDU. So.
I have been taking notes, and I have a lot of questions, but I don't want to take up the group's time. I would like to share that I am going to be publishing a chapter of a book about African-American men and their ability to not just integrate, but use the potential that they have based on the access and equality that is part of the American educational system and professional society. However, there are sociological setbacks that are going to be part of my chapter. So it's really nice to see that this was a topic for today. I also would like to shout out back to Mr. Burns and Mr. Bergers, because I do have a lot of military in my family. They're not from the US military, they're from Greece and France. But they were involved in that generation, and there are a lot of stories, and they're all kind of, you know, with that wry smirk that my grandfather used to give when he told the stories. It was nice to hear the story from this perspective, and it brought back some interesting memories. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Berger, you articulated this, and I can't paraphrase it, but when you said it, it is still stuck with me, and it was in regard to, it's not Black lives, it's not white lives, it is, and I don't know what your essence word there was, but you were saying, you know, as long as we're alive, this is what this is our story, and we're sticking to it.
Yeah, it's all the airmen to a man or to a woman, because we have a lot of the women who love the airmen, part of the chapter also. They will articulate the same thing. All lives matter, and it's only one race, the human race. That's our banner. That's our flag.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you again, gentlemen. It was an honor to have you here. At this point, we are closing the meeting, where we will have our closing prayer if Evelyn Carmichael is still with us. Evelyn, are you here? Yes, I heard a yes. Okay, gentlemen, I do want to give you the opportunity before our closing prayer, if there's anything else that you would like to add to what you've said today, we would be more than happy to hear it.
Just one more comment. Most of the men that I was involved with in 2006 got to see a Black president. So I don't believe there could be anything more incredible in their lives than to finally see the United States with a Black president, and the button popping spirit of these gentlemen. For the inauguration, I happened to be helping them on a bus to Washington for Mr. Obama's inauguration. And I cannot tell you about the emotion and the excitement that these folks were experiencing, because all they had fought for, all they had seen, all they had experienced is finally coming true, that the country had a Black president. I do want to leave you with that, ladies.
God bless you. That's a very good note to presence and to call out, especially in lieu of what we've just heard.
Yes,
that makes it all that much more meaningful. Thank you.
Right. Feel free to contact myself or Paul. I believe you have my contact information. If you had any other questions or you wanted something in addition, we will continue to send links to you if you would like.
And you can
Yes.
tell them, Ray, that we do bring the road show to them.
Yes,
because
we do travel. How far, we don't know yet.
That's great news.
Mr. Burns and
Yes.
Mr. Berger, I've just, during your presentation, I've contacted Lieutenant Colonel Kelly at Xavier High School. We partner with their JROTC program on a couple of things that we do for them. And I sent him an email saying that I really think the regiment would love to hear from you. So expect maybe a contact from either Colonel Kelly or myself facilitating that connection. I
Love
think.
to have it.
Thank you.
Love to have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. And Mr. Burns and Mr. Berger, with your permission, may we disseminate your emails to the chapter in
Yes.
regard to if there are any questions?
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. And we would love to get your links as well. If you would please, any information that you have, you can either send it to Linda Rhodes Jones or myself. I am the chapter regent, just I don't think I've mentioned that. So so you can send it to Linda Jones or myself, and we will get that out to the chapter.
Thank you.
So thank you. That leaves us with our closing prayer. Evelyn Carmichael, if you would please share that with us.
Yes, let's bow our heads. I've chosen some words by Martin Luther King Jr. to close us out today. He said, "We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope." Amen.
Amen. Thank you. I am going to officially close the meeting, but if Mr. Burns and Mr. Berger would like to stay, and anybody who would like to stay and chat on the Zoom presentation, as long as it's okay with Alyssa Rich-Farrell, then you're welcome to do that. Right now, I'm going to officially end the meeting. Meeting's officially ended. But I would like to say, Mr. Burns and Mr. Berger, it was such an honor to have you here today. And I just cannot thank you enough for what you provided for us.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, ladies.
And also Mr. Moses.
Yes.
Thank you.
Of course. Without Mr. Moses, we would not have this
That's for
possible.
sure.
Yeah, you did a great job with the presentation. I didn't understand what you were saying when you'd be together at the Zoom, but this made it so much more dimensional to have you here with that background and the availability of your props to share them. It was very enjoyable. So thank you to all of you for putting that together.
Thank you, ma'am.